I'm Joanne Lee, here to talk to you about the book My Favorite Thing is Monsters. Now, My Favorite Thing is Monsters may not seem like a postmodern work, but it is much more subtle than Jimmy Corrigan's The Smartest Kid on Earth.
But what exactly is postmodernism? I will be using Frederick Jameson's work from the Norton Anthology to talk about postmodernism, specifically the effacement in it of some key boundaries or separations, most notably the erosion of the older distinction between high culture and so-called mass or popular culture. This brings us to an element of postmodernism called pastiche, which is, like parody, the imitation of a particular or unique style. Pastiche incorporates or blends different styles and art forms to produce a blended work that does not just quote texts, but incorporates them. Postmodernism is framed as a reaction to the turbulent times of the 1940s and on. The 1960s showcases this, especially with much of the effacement between boundaries seen in the urban expansion of cities leading to a mixing of people of different classes and race. These blended groups of people gave rise to the phenomenon of intersectionality, which, as Merriam-Webster defines it, is the way that multiple forms of discrimination combine, something that can be easily seen in diverse populated cities.
So how does it relate to intersectionality?
First, let's let Kimberly Crenshaw, the originator of the term intersectionality, define it for us.
Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice.
In My Favorite Thing is Monsters, these intersectional issues come into play with Karen, the protagonist and a young Latina lesbian living in 1960s Chicago.
Ferris uses pastiche in the blending of different genres and styles to demonstrate the need to be aware of and tolerant of intersectional identities, and criticizes the 1960s approach to intersectional identities.
Now, with that hefty introduction out of the way, let's jump into the book. The first image I will analyze is one of the earliest ones, where a mob is coming after Karen after she has transformed into a werewolf. The image covers 2 pages and is drawn in a black and white style that stands in contrast to earlier frames that are full of color. The black and white effect shows the mob as a mass of white people that all seem very similar, with faces in the back even morphing into each other somewhat. These pages present an angry mob attacking what they cannot understand, namely Karen's true identity as a werewolf, mirroring how many attack Karen's homosexual identity. Additionally, in the corner, the classical painting American Gothic is blended into the scene, resulting in a style pastiche between the classical painting and this action-filled comic medium. This pastiche highlights an erasure of boundaries and stands in stark contrast to the desires of the mob to keep Karen separate. This next image shows an intersection between class and sexual orientation. These 2 pages show Karen and Missy's last sleepover together. Missy's mom then discriminates against Karen for her low class and sexual orientation. Not only does she view Karen as inferior because of her economic status, but also she is appalled by the idea of Karen influencing her daughter to be a lesbian. This struggle to keep their 2 identities apart is contrasted against genre pastiche of a monster story and a love story. These panels portray classic monster imagery of a vampire and a werewolf and have the classic elements of a monster being misunderstood and isolated from others. There are also elements of a classic love story with the 2 lovers being kept apart, as well as secret kisses at night. The use of pastiche here again contrasts against Missy's mom's desire to erect firm boundaries against intersectional identities. Additionally, it is shown here how the sexual revolution in the 1960s allows for free expression of sexual desires for heterosexual women, with Missy being allowed to have beauty magazines and date boys, but not being allowed to show her homosexual identity. This image shows the intersection between race and sexual orientation. Franklin is confronted by another African American man after learning of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. The man's violent words against Franklin frame his face menacingly, and in contrast to other panels are not encased in a speech bubble. This has the effect of emphasizing the anger and violence spilling out from his words that can't even be contained by a speech bubble. This fairly clearly shows a failing in the 1960s civil rights movement that does not have room for Franklin's gender nonconforming identity, even though he is black. The man does not accept Franklin's intersectional identity and repeatedly insists that they are not brothers. In these images, again, we have the intersection between class and sexual orientation. Missy and Karen are finally able to express their feelings, but must do it secretly in the stairwell. Missy's mom again discriminates against Karen, both condemning her for her low economic status and not wanting her to be seen at their floor, as well as her sexual orientation by not wanting Missy exposed to Karen. We can also see how the sexual revolution in the 60s allows Missy's mom to let Missy spin the bottle and begin dating boys at a young age, but still forces her and Karen to hide in a stairwell just for a hug. Again, there is a use of genre pastiche here with the blending of classic monster story elements as they are forced to hide their monstrous or homosexual identities, as well as the culmination of their love story as they are finally able to express their true selves. This contrasts with the refusal of Missy's mom to allow them to demonstrate their intersectional identities. In this image, we see the aftermath of Karen coming out to Dees. Although he accepts her sexual orientation, he is worried of the consequences of telling others, even their own mother, as she lies dying of cancer. He worries that others will want to hurt Karen for her sexual orientation, as has almost already happened. This shows the intersection between her sexual orientation and her economic status and race, contributing to an environment that presents heavy challenges for a young Latina lesbian in 1960s Chicago. It also demonstrates the rejection in the 1960s of queer identities. Additionally, these panels and speech bubbles are very disorienting to follow and do not have an easy flow for your eyes to follow. It can be very difficult to tell which speech bubbles are supposed to be read first, creating a disorienting effect that parallels Karen's confusion and disorientation at being able to come out to her brother but having to be forced back into the closet immediately after.
So we've talked about in a lot of the earlier images that we've shown here, kind of Ferris's criticisms of how the 1960s have treated intersectional identities and how some of our failings when it comes to them. So we kind of see here her vision of what she would like the world to be, where you can see that these frames are very different from earlier frames where you have words just written on the sides, where it seems kind of like she is trying to speak directly to the reader here as they surround this central image of a man being attacked by demons, kind of portraying what she is saying, what Karen is saying here about the difference between bad monsters and good monsters, where Karen views bad monsters as people who are all about control, and she says they want the world to be scared. And this is kind of what Ferris is saying about how we view intersectional identities, where they're things that are scary or things that should be put away and not thought about, but she wants them to be more out in the open and us to be able to be tolerant of them. So you can see here, it seems like she is speaking almost directly to the reader, not only about this poster, but more about what she views, what we should do about intersectional identities. So again, we can see kind of Ferris's vision of what good world would be like. And if we can contrast this image to the earlier American Gothic image, where it's very black and white, it's all one monochrome, and it's all one race of people, one very white mass of people, whereas in this one you can see a lot of different races, a lot of different types of people around, and kind of it's a very colorful, striking image that kind of shows Ferris's idea of what a better world would be like, one where we can be more tolerant and aware of people's intersectional identities. And this kind of is the Chicago that Karen sees, where it's a mix of people around, and there's a lot of different types of people, there's different races, there's a blend of people's identities here, and this is kind of like the Ferris's vision of what she would like and what she's trying to show we should move towards in her book, and in her mixing of different genres and different styles, we can see how she's moving towards this vision of this blend of people.
Ferris's use of pastiche in My Favorite Thing is Monsters highlights the poor treatment in the 1960s towards intersectional identities and demonstrates the need to be more aware of and tolerant of the intersection of different identities.